wonderful introduction, but I have to kind of start with a slight disappointment, because I was moved from last week to this week because I was on a train last week, and I therefore honestly thought that because of that move, I had to talk about process because that was the original theme of this day. So maybe you can see me as a bridge between the process research from last time and maybe the outcome research this time. I will participate actively, obviously, with that second topic as well. But I've prepared for process research. I don't think there will be too much overlap with last time. This is where I work. For those who don't know, it's a business school near London, in a beautiful manor house built on a Augustinian, a Normannic convent, and we do programs in coaching, supervision, qualification courses, and we also have a great many, as you can see, coaches in many countries in the world, all accredited, and a doctorate program and many other things. Then on to me. I know I have only 15 minutes, so I'm going to flick through slides very quickly. This is me. I see myself as having 3 roles in life. Sometimes I find it a little bit too busy, but I like particularly the overlap between the roles. So in Ashridge, I'm associate dean, one of 3. In my other university, where I'm also a professor in Amsterdam, I'm the chair of a department. So I have leadership roles and researcher roles, and that means that I can devote myself to leadership studies, but in a real sense, I feel. So without having that leadership responsibility, I don't feel I can really talk about it. It would be too glib in my view. But even stronger, I feel that coaching research needs to be very strongly linked with practice. And I'm sure that you all agree if I look at the topics these days, last week and this week. But I feel that we need real world research. And I also benefit a lot from being a practitioner, developing or accrediting many coaches. So occasionally I get access to for example, we've done this randomized control trial that you mentioned, Richard, with 120 accredited coaches, each doing a single assignment in the randomized control trial. And so we could say we have real coaches, not 23-year-olds like unfortunately you have to have in pure academic research in more traditional universities. Finally, I'm on a leadership journey, where I combine, when I coach, I can empathize better sometimes with the struggles, because I find leadership a pretty hard act, that I often fail in. And in the center of all this is my particle physics. I graduated with my MSc on the Higgs boson. Those days, 1989, we tried to prove that it could not exist. It was impossible to exist, such a strange particle, and we had a very strong case for that. And now, I think 2012 or 2015, they found it. So I was shocked, but I was glad that I left physics many years before. I am still very, very interested in the elementary forces, or in the tiniest particles in this field. I would like to know, just like you, Richard, I think that research that you just announced, and I've seen it on LinkedIn as well, being announced, about behaviors, skills that make a difference in coaching. I think that's very important, that we can go back to some kind of a basic conception of what works. And we'll do that the rest of the evening, maybe not in my talk, because I'll stay with process. Here are my 2 most recent books, and together they form a kind of a handbook, I would say. I think the best, most extensive summary we have of our research in coaching over the last 30 years or so. The first book it was on qualitative research. So that's all about what happens inside coaching. And in that particular book, the critical moments, because it's my own hobby horse, my own field, they dominate slightly in that book. So that's why the trapeze is there, and you never know whether that goes well or not when they're like that in midair. So you're inside the coaching experience, whereas in outcome research, you use a number or a string, a vector of numbers coming out of research, of the coaching assignment or the coaching journey, and you never look inside. Only if you do qualitative research with very, very large data sets can you do some outcome research as well. And that's why I think as this speech might be a bridging speech, because some of our own research was so large scale that we managed to quantify some of our findings in the very end. But we started with qualitative data, i.e. data from within coaching, from what happens from moment to moment in our case. But you can think of sessions as well, or skills, as you said. And we have now about 100 plus peer-reviewed original studies in the qualitative field. So that's going really well, I think. And if Tony Grant has shown how they go, exponentially upwards, the numbers of studies from year to year. That's very positive too. On the quantitative side, we now have more than 200 studies. If you cast your net as wide as you can, but they are original quantitative studies, and they're not just pre-post trials, which are very, very unreliable. You need a control group. So, good studies. Some might argue it's 160, but I think you can come to 200 and over. And we have 35 randomized control trials now, and that's amazing too. So we've just submitted a meta-analysis based on only randomized control trials. And that will be the first in our field. And I think, again, that research, the quantitative research is accelerating at the moment. It's going very well for us. Or maybe I see people putting things on the chat. So I like to have researchers in my network. So here you are. That's my LinkedIn. Let's look at qualitative research to start with this evening or afternoon. And oh yeah, there we are. Ooh, now I'm going too fast. If you look at qualitative research, you're going into the coaching sessions themselves. And there are essentially 4 different types of qualitative research that you can look at. And if you look at the systematic review that we've done, there's about equal numbers in every category. So that I think it's a fair division of the field of qualitative research in these 4. Action research, something that was started by Kurt Lewin, as you know, in the United States, it gets the closest to the actual coaching sessions. It's almost like coaching. It's asking yourself reflective questions about the here and now, and reflecting on your reflections. So something that coachee will very often do anyway. But when it has a research question, you might easily turn that into an action research project. Then case study research could be about a single session, or what's her name? There's an article about 15 minutes of coaching. I forgot the names of the authors, but you could start very small with that, with case studies. You can also compare different cases, different full assignments together. Then there's field research. Field research means that you go into the field, you might get your hands dirty, or you might get involved, you might tweak the coaching itself because you're in there. And there's some beautiful papers there as well, where, for example, clients, coachees, have been asked a series of questions in interviews between every one of their sessions. And you can make an analysis then on how their answers on that particular topic, how they develop as a result of their development journey and their developmental journey. And process research, where probably the most of the good research is going on. And I know Angela Pastorelli, who's here, has spoken about a beautiful, PhD of her own, and the kind of research you can do with bioindicators, or which is essentially also process research. So you begin, you inquire into certain markers, and you see, for example, when somebody is brain is being scanned, you can at the same time you can make them look at a question, and that's slightly similar to a coaching conversation. So you're doing an exploration of the process. In this case, in their brains, the absorption of oxygen or what have you by brain cells. Another example is our own critical moment research, which I will say a bit more about in a moment. And I like the what was used to be called the Braunschweig research, but people have now left Braunschweig and they became professor in other universities, mostly in Austria and Germany. And so there are now various groups looking into video tape and single interventions. So it gets close to what Richard was talking about with when you're wondering about which interventions make a difference, which are more effective, which are less effective. I think that school is very good as well, analyzing 10,000s of different moments of coaching from a video recording. That's also process research. And you can look at these various forms of research in this matrix as well, where you can see that in some of them, you essentially often research yourself. Many of the authors were participating in the cases, in the case study analysis. Certainly in the action research, you have to participate. Whereas in the other two areas, field research, process research, it is much better if you are more detached from the coaching and you can keep a neutral observing stance. You can also make a distinction between phenomenological research, which would be research in the here and now, and retrospective research. I spoke about those videos of recorded coaching sessions. Obviously, they are after the fact. They're only based on video data, not on being in the room. But nowadays we're all happy with video, I think, when we meet. So maybe it's representative of the real thing. Anyway, it's retrospective. So two of those are also retrospective. Now we're getting to my own journey with process research, which started in 2002, where this was part of a development program for consultants, where they had an extra module of about 5 days to specialize or to learn about individual consultation, about coaching. And at the beginning of that module, I asked these experienced consultants, but inexperienced coaches, what critical moments would they like to submit to our program and think about from their practice in one-to-one conversations. And we got 80 moments over the course of a few years of doing that program. So from 80 different participants, 60 different participants, that's on the left. And we started to analyze, what are these people expressing about what they find critical? And I particularly asked about a moment, which is hard to define, but Daniel Stern has written a beautiful book about called The Present Moment, where he did a very good job at defining it. It's sort of the length of our attention span, and it's between about 2 and 8 seconds. So I know that I catch each and every one of you every 8 seconds or so if I'm lucky, but I also lose every one of you within about that time span, because that's how attention works. It drifts, it moves, it ebbs and flows. So those moments we analyzed, and we found such fascinating patterns in those moments that we continued the research, and we started asking very experienced coaches, more than 10-year experience, and specializing in coaching, and so on. Only 5 years after starting, I had the idea, finally, of maybe we could also ask a client of coaching. And this is quite a typical phenomenon in research, that the researchers are mostly coaches, and the coaches think most about the coach perspective on coaching. So it took us 5 years to think about the client perspective, which perhaps is a much more important perspective. And so on we went, because we found a very different result for the clients. We also did some direct comparison studies, which were very hard to do. We had to go and visit the coach and the client on location and do a half-hour depth interview with them when they were perhaps already a bit depleted or tired from their session. But we persisted and we collected 86 moments. Then we did a case study where we collected moments of critical moments per session in that study. And finally, we were also able in a larger study to ask sponsors of coaching. So the commissioners of the coaching work about moments where they perceived, which they thought were critical to do with the coaching assignment. So not being there, but nevertheless reporting a moment of difference or a moment of a key moment with their colleague. And that gave us a very large data set and 7 peer-reviewed articles. I think I have to skip a few slides. I only have 5 minutes left, I think. I would like to convey to you what we found briefly. This is the argument for why you should look at moments, why they are relevant research object, but I won't dwell on this. And then there's the method that we did. You can read about that afterwards. But essentially, we asked the very same question in every piece of research to all the new groupings, from client to coach to experienced coach, no, from coach to experienced coach, and then finally to client, etc. Okay, what did we find? A few slides about that. No words, because by now, especially if you're from the UK, you're probably tired from hearing all those words from me. I'll do it in pictures. We found with the coach a big sense of self-doubt. These were inexperienced coaches only starting their journey, but many of them wrote about, who were they to contribute anything to a manager who comes for a session. What should they do? How should they go about coaching? So they had a kind of a distorted view of self, or they were very focused on their doubts, and very often their doubts were highly relevant for what they were trying to do. So the doubts also seem to be very generative. So painful at the same time as generative for these coaches. And this is a picture that we kept actually also with the experienced coaches and the very experienced ones that we researched later on. They were also much more anxious than we had imagined when describing their critical events and critical data. And of course, what we didn't realize is that they were submitting to us very dramatic moments. So often we instructed them to take a moment from the last year, but perhaps they've seen many clients and they chose the most dramatic rupture in all of those sessions. So we only realized this later and afterwards. And we analyzed those. I won't bore you with the details. We then finally went to the coachee and we found something completely different, which was that the coachee was much more focused on realizing something new, finding out something, either about themselves or about their situation, people they worked with. So insight seemed to be extremely important in this group, much more than in the previous groupings that we had already published on. So that was quite amazing. The word realization or realize was the most frequent noun in the data. So you can imagine. And the other thing that I found interesting was that they didn't always recognize the idea of a critical moment, although the coaches immediately did, and many clients also did. Not all clients thought in those terms. So we're very satisfied, very happy clients who said this was a more of a constant presence for me, or a continuous help that I've been given. I couldn't begin to choose a moment. So we had these two different stories, and we began to wonder, are they in a session, these in different roles, obviously, do they also come out with different memories of their session? So do they come out with different stories after they've done their coaching? like this, with the coach story, a bit more gloomy, a bit more anxiety driven, emotional, sometimes also very proud, obviously, but nevertheless much more on the emotional than on the let's say the outcomes. So as a next step, this is when we interviewed coaches and clients on the same day, and we later did this coaching clients in the same assignment as well, after a whole assignment. We had this question about Rashomon. I see that Richard recognizes the movie. He's nodding. Beautiful movie, the first Japanese movie that was a great success in America. It's the movie where by Kurosawa, where you have a single event, a murder, in fact, on a medieval path. And the event is being retold by 4 different participants who were there in front of a judge, in front of a court. And they each have a completely different story where there's a different killer, obviously. So they come out of the same event with completely, incommensurable stories. So do we have a Rashomon in coaching or not? A question that had been asked already in therapy. Can I go on 2 more minutes or not? Is it too much? Yes, you're nodding. Okay. So what we actually found is when we measured after a session or after a whole assignment from both parties about the same material, and we again asked about critical moments or key moments, there was a remarkable consistency in their stories. And in fact, they had largely the same story. We still found more doubts, more emotions, more anxiety in the coach's story, and slightly more insight and outcome, what the client took from the event. But they, in more than 50% of the cases, and this is where statistics was possible because we had these large numbers, in more than 50% of the cases, the story was about the same event, the same 2 to 8 seconds, if you wish, in terms of the moment, which statistically would be highly, highly unlikely. And not just that, they also focused on the same aspects of the key moment. In fact, both parties now mostly spoke about insight and realizations. So it was only then that we realized we had a different sample from the coaches who described the much more dramatic moments of rupture. And then finally, I told you the sponsor was also involved. I think a bit of a complex drawing there, but it's the idea is to kind of illustrate that in the 3 parties in the conversation, different elements come out in their stories, because that was still an important aspect of our finding. Not about the same session, but overall, the parties look at different aspects. And the sponsors very strongly looked at action. So all of their examples, not all of them, but many of their critical moments, their stories that we took from them, they focused on a change in behavior or a change in action, how somebody was acting in a meeting or how somebody was taking up their work. So it does seem to be the case on the basis of our qualitative research that those parties have different views on the coaching. So the client is happy with great moments of deep insight, but their boss, the commissioner, would like to see a result coming out of that, for example. And I think also the coach, still much more emphasis on anxiety and emotion, and also physiology. Very often the body is mentioned in the moments of the coach, never the body is mentioned in the moments of the clients. And still, they are both human beings of similar education, etc. So we have spin-off, you can read that later. Maybe it's fun to, as a very last slide, to show you this one. This is the statistics based on all the moments we collected. You can see that these bars of frequency count of different codes were coded by raters, and the raters were correlated and so on. There was a lot of statistics being done. And you see these different bars. Here's the sponsor, the commissioner. And number 6 is a moment of action initiated by the coachee. Number 5 is a moment of action initiated by the coach. So the sponsors bump out here. Numbers 1 and 2, mostly clients. Moments of insight, number 1. Moments of realization, moments of new perspectives, number 2. Those 2 are the most frequent ones amongst clients. And then over here we have positive emotion client, they are positive emotion coach, negative emotion client, and negative emotion coach. You see that the experienced coaches, they experience quite a lot of anxiety, or they report quite a lot of anxiety. And then finally, doubt by the coachee. You see the coachee never doubts, both in the words of the coach and of the coachee. But the coach does doubt, especially the inexperienced one. They go all the way up to more than 50% of the coding that we've given by the 6 or so coders are about doubt. And that's it. That was my whole presentation. Sorry not to be on topic, Richard, again.